It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, I don't speak any Arabic, and my French is quite poor. So I trust that you'll either be able to understand what I say in English or that you'll have access to the translation services. I'm going to talk about how it's so challenging often to work with young people, and we wonder why they have to be so rebellious, they have to be so difficult to work with, they have to be so challenging. But there are many reasons, and one of the things that's really important is that the challenges that they bring to the table, the difficulties that they bring, also come with huge brilliance, also come with huge potential, also come with the wonder that it is to be inquisitive, the wonder that it is to want to learn, and the wonder that it is to be wanting to establish yourself who you are. So when we think about it, it is really an important part of what it is to grow up. Adolescence is an important part. One of the phases that they go through, and it's quite important we understand that because we can never make sense of it. I used to think before all the studies were available that young people, when they got to about the age of 12, they had a button here that was switched off, that stopped them from understanding anything that was logical or from behaving in a way that was useful. And that at some point when they were about 16, 17, they switched on the button again. That's without understanding, 30 years ago, what the science said. So we know now that when a child is growing, they are growing like a forest. Branches everywhere, leaves, it's happening really, really, really rapidly. And what's happening is that all these connections are quite important to establish what comes after. They've got to have as many chances to develop as possible, but then when it comes to about the age of 11, it's as if we start to specialize because we cannot all be good at everything. It's impossible. It's like a human nature thing. So what happens? We start to prune. So if you imagine that we have this huge, huge forest and we need to make space for the things that are important, we need to start to prune. And there is a pruning. There is that pruning sort of process that makes it much easier for the things we want to develop to then grow. And this process of myelination, which then once it's sorted, what happens is that the young person begins to think much faster, there's better connection, and we have much more efficient learning. But the process is one that is quite complex. And we can see it there. It's a very simple example, so quite dense. Then the pruning happens, and then we have really efficient sort of networks which really work. And that takes a while. That can take 5, 6, 7 years, depending on the developmental delay of the person. So when we think about why it's so important, it's simply because understanding that the biggest growth is actually when you're a little baby. And then again, it happens at about, from the age of 10 onwards. We can see how that is developing. So that will happen right up until the age of 25. And if we think about the most important part of it, so this is the part that is based with logical thinking, with the reasoning, with being able to calm yourself. If that is not developing at the same rate, and all we have are impulses, the natural impulses we'll have as a child, there's going to be a deficit. There's like a difference. And we can see it there. We can see how, the limbic system is the one that develops. So we're going to have very strong emotions, and that's going to be happening all the time because we are going to have all sorts of issues with that. But then the part that we use to understand what we need to do with those emotions, we might get very, very angry. We might lose our patience. The part that says, okay, it's okay, think about it, that's not developed yet. So it's quite challenging. And we can see how it works there. Very, very, very simply, the limbic system is the part that continues developing very, very fast. And then the cortex, the prefrontal, that takes much, much longer. And it's much, much faster in girls. It actually develops much faster in girls than in boys. But there isn't that much of a difference. Now, so what happens when you're a young person? We are experiencing all sorts of things. We're young, we're experiencing many emotions, and we want to be able to understand what is going on there. So, we take risks, and we don't take risks because we think, right, I want to take some risks now. That's not how it works. It's that we don't quite understand the consequences of the action that we're going to take. They could be quite risky. So that part is not developed yet. And why all of a sudden a young person can be calm and quite relaxed, something happens and they lose it very, very quickly. Again, that part of the system that says, calm yourself, it's okay, something will be okay, something will happen, there will be change, that is not in place yet. So one of the things that is important for teachers, not just teachers, because often parents will say, why are you talking to me like that? You've never been like that. What's happened? And they need help in understanding that it is a normal development. When I have a son who's now in his 20s, and when he was about 12, he was always a very good boy. When he was about 12, and I would say, and he would go, ah! My mother would say, don't answer back. And she would get, quite disappointed. And I would say to her, it's okay. It's his way of establishing who he is, and he can't really help that. He can't, it's a way of growing into it. Now, if we see that as an important phase in that development, and we have that in mind, we don't react back. We don't get cross. We remain calm, and we become the structure externally that they are missing. A little bit like in a building when we have scaffolding. So during this time, they are understanding what their identity is. And that's quite challenging because they were, young kids. They had ideas about things. As schooling moves on, they are expected to be more independent, to learn some things, to question who they are. So it's important. And they've got to find a new sense of belonging. They are no longer someone's child. They are now beginning to enter a phase where they are a person in their own right. So it really is important that we start to think about it in that sense, no? That they are going to, it's not that, for example, they don't want to go to have dinner with parents because they prefer to go with their peers. That is normal. When they come back into their 20s, 21, 22, they start understanding again how important parents are. But they're not rejecting parents. They're actually embracing who they are, which is quite important. So why is it important to have that sort of structure? Because how we respond to young people when they are struggling, when they have challenges, when they find things difficult is crucial. If we react in a negative way, all we do is reinforce a negative way of behaving. If we react in a positive, calm way, we are helping them to understand that there are many ways of handling things. And I think that is what is crucial. So I think all of us remember, I think I still do, when we were in school and we had that teacher who was kind, that teacher who was patient, that teacher who sat down and said, just come here, what's going on for you? And I think whenever I give talks to teachers, and I do that quite often, and sometimes they say to me, what strategies do you use? And they want this magic. But there is no magic. Because the biggest thing that we can do is to be present. The biggest thing that we can do is to be present and detached from feeling that what they are doing to us or what they are saying to us is personal. If we sit and we can become detached and we can be sort of like an accomplice in the way that they are developing and structuring their thoughts, we've got that battle won. There is no strategy, there's no magic wand, and every person is going to be different. Another thing that people would say, well, it's much better when you're a younger teacher. because they're going to relate to you. But not necessarily. Some of my best teachers were much, much older, and what did they have? That patience, that understanding, that I had a purpose, that I had a role, and they were prepared to act as that scaffolding. They were prepared to listen to my anxiety, to my unhappiness, without making judgments. Because what happens here? Young people are quite susceptible to judgment, aren't they? They find it very difficult to be judged, especially by their peers. So if anything happens in front of peers, that is going to make it worse, because they are going to immediately think they are thinking bad things about me. And I think that is really important. So we have a big role in trying to protect our younger people from those levels of anxiety by remaining calm. So one of the things, again, you are being present, but what do you also have to do? You have to be curious. So yes, I get it, you're cross. Tell me a little bit more about why you are cross, instead of saying you shouldn't be cross. Tell me a little bit more why you are unhappy. What can I do? What can I do to make this less difficult? You tell me what you need from me. Doesn't mean we can always help. Doesn't mean we can always give it. But something that I have also learned in the 30 years plus is that sometimes when the young person is heard, that is enough. We don't need to do much more. The young person wants to be heard and seen and valued. And I think it's quite important. When I was growing up, my granny used to say that little children had to be seen, but not heard. Of course, we don't say those things anymore. And one of the things that I've loved about Morocco, I've been coming to Morocco now for 40 years, is how attentive parents are with their children. I have seen it in trips. I have seen it when I cross the ferry from Gibraltar, when, little children are quite anxious, and I have seen them, calm them like this with a hand, sit them down, talk to them, look at them in the eye, not scream and shout. Sometimes I'm a parent, you lose your patience, no? But I've seen that, and I think it's one of the things that I understand about this community, that you are much more patient than we are in Europe. So I think in many ways, you have those qualities already. Stress, we know, I think there was a presentation on that before, but we know how much stress, and cortisol has an impact on our brains, no? So we make so many demands on our young people, don't we? We make huge demands. I don't really know how many exams they do around this age in the Moroccan system. I know you're going through reforms, which I think is great. In the United Kingdom, we had reforms about 3 or 4 years ago, and it looks as if we're going to have more again because the world is changing. But during that time, young people are exposed to many, many pressures, not just their own, not just the fact that they might be growing very quickly, but also examinations. And that will have an impact. The more stressed out you are, the less capable you are. So I was listening to presentations before, how to use mindfulness, how to use activities that are creative. All those things are going to help. So we'll think, what is important about our young people? Should they be questioning? Should they be questioning authority? Should they be questioning what we know? And my answer to that is yes, because in 20 years' time, I am not going to be here. Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know. In 20 years' time. But in 20 years' time, they are going to be here. And the world is theirs. The world is going to be theirs. So they have to question what I have known to be correct, what I have known to be the right thing. And they've got to look at, sometimes people will say, oh, I raised my child as I was raised. That was 30 years ago. The world has changed. When I was raised, there was no internet. No internet. Now there's AI, which is very scary. You cannot raise your children in the same way. Mobile phones, it's impossible. Because when I was little, I used to be, like I see a lot in Morocco still, I used to be outdoors. I used to be covered in mud. I used to be playing with cats and dogs. Young people don't do that anymore. So you can't treat them in the same way. You have to be understanding that. So is it a lack of respect? It's not. It's just the world is different, and we've got to adapt to that. So what's important here? What's important? We have lived a life that hopefully we're teachers, that was useful. We have reached, an important point in our career. Do we have something to give our young people? Yes. We have that sense of being able to guide them rather than controlling them. One of the things that I have never done, I have never punished a student. In fact, I've never punished my son either, but I have never rewarded either. I have never rewarded. I have worked in a way where I have helped people understand what the consequences are. That's quite a modern way of looking at it now, not reinforcing the behavior that is positive. But it's quite challenging in a classroom when you have many people. It's quite a challenging thing to do. So if I were to say to you, no, don't get cross, don't punish anybody, it's quite difficult. But when you have them on a one-to-one, that can be very different. Now, if you engage, I think all of us would have had one of those moments, no? Now, how we respond to that is key. And the more you try to control, the more that brain does that. So we've got to make sure that we create a scenario where we let the student know that it's okay. It's okay to be cross. To a certain extent. No, you're not going to be rude, you're not going to throw a chair around, you're not going to do all that, but it's okay to be cross. Let's sit down and let's have a chat about it. Yeah? What do you need to know? What isn't working for you? How can I help you? Ask me questions. And one thing that young people, because if we remember that this part has still not developed, sarcasm. If you try to be funny, young people, you're going to lose them. Why? Because we might understand it. And of course, in Britain, sarcasm is, we do that all the time. The British sense of humor is sarcastic. If you do that, you're going to lose them. If we think about how we might be able to resolve problems then, we've got to work with a person in a collaborative way. We've got to find ways of working with them that are sort of, engaging. So, debates. And it doesn't mean that you are going to have really intellectual debates, but it does mean that we're going to open it up to people. Now, sometimes teachers say, but some students don't want to speak up. Well, maybe those students can actually write something and share. Maybe those students can have an opportunity later to give you their opinion. Because we've got to think, I think one of the things that you're doing now with your reforms is being very inclusive, looking at all sorts of disabilities and abilities. So not everybody is going to be okay to put their hand up and to ask a question. I think in an audience like this, many people don't ask a question, but many people have questions. They just don't ask them. And that might be for different reasons. No? So it's important we do that. And to be creative. I've seen some incredible stuff going on out there in those domes. Unfortunately, I couldn't understand much of it, but a lot of painting, a lot of creative work, a lot of theater. We need to be able to do more of that. Of course, sometimes young people, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, aren't going to do an activity that is very active. But they can have the choice. No? And I think that those things are quite important because it engages them. They need to have some ownership. They need to know that they can also be in control, that they can control decisions. Not all decisions, but some decisions. And sometimes if we help them to understand why those decisions are important, that is key. So some people are going to say, what? You give them a choice of task? Yes, I may have a lesson, an overall lesson, and then I might think, I know that this particular student is quite good at doing mind maps or diagrams, and this particular person is quite good at giving a speech. This particular person is quite good at doing a research project. If I get the result that tells me that they have learned, I'm fine with that. I don't need to have a paper that says, this is what I have learned. So in exams, we have to do that. Yeah? But if we are wanting to engage people, then that's a good way of doing it. And many young people like to work in teams. And that's important, isn't it? Because we all have to work in teams. We all need to work in teams. We get to a stage in our lives, we have a job, we have to work in teams. And we have to know when we can take charge, when we can allow someone else to take charge, when we can share activities, when we have to take back things. So it's important that that is given to them. But when we give them that task and we step back and we see, we look at what they're doing, we support that. And they own it. They own the project. And as I said before, relationships are key. So I always say that, 40 years later, I have two teachers that I still remember. One, when I was 5 years old, I still remember her. I was a very quiet student, very quiet, very shy, but she saw that I was very good at art, and she would, say, I'd like you to draw something for me. And I'd sit there and I'd draw on the big board. And then she'd say, that's wonderful. I still remember her. In fact, I'm lucky in Gibraltar, I still see her. She's now in her 80s, but I still manage to see her. And she still says to me, remember when you used to do the drawings for me? And I said, I will never forget them. And then another one, when I was 15, I wanted to leave school. I was listening to talk on how many young people in Morocco don't attend or leave school early. I wanted to leave school because I was quite unhappy in school. And this teacher said, Ash, sit. What's going on? And that was enough. Nothing changed, only what I thought. The school didn't change, the students didn't change, the course didn't change. I changed. Because the teacher helped me to see something differently, because I couldn't. So it's really important that we're able to do that. Listening. Sometimes we think we're listening, but young people, because they're so sensitive, this is not developed yet, they're so sensitive, all you have to do is go like this, and they think, not listening to me. All they have to do is go, not listening to me, and you lose them. So it's quite important that we listen attentively. And movement. How many times, young people sit in desks for hours and hours and hours often. They sit for very long times. How simple it would be to say, okay, let's stand. Let's put our hands up. Of course, some people are not going to enjoy that, but sometimes it's okay. Sometimes you have to say, okay, let's just go and have a walk. Or let's go and do this activity. Or let's go and do something differently. That often helps. Because when someone is thinking and sitting, that is not a good thing for someone. I don't know how long young people have to be here in school, but in the British system, they can be in school, for 7 hours. That's a long time. That's a long time in the day. In some schools, they go in at 9 o'clock in the morning and they leave at 6 in the evening. That's a very long time. So, if we think about what a young mind needs, and we need to be able to replace this. We need to be able to replace the mobile phone with that stimulation. They need stimulation, which is why they're on that constantly. Can we provide it? Yes, we can. We can do all sorts of things to help them do that. And there's lots of the things that we have looked at that I have explained, no? How to resolve conflict, how to achieve things, how to work in groups, project-based learning. All those things are key. And how we can engage them in the decision-making. Again, the British system, when you are 14, allows you to choose the subjects that you want. So, for example, if you don't want to do geography by the age of 14, you can choose not to do geography. You might want to do sciences or the arts. And that's important. I know, for example, the Spanish system expects you to do everything throughout, no? So it's understandable that if you struggle with some subjects, you will drop out. Now, so if we think that all the young people are in a stage where they are a problem to be solved, then we are going to have a second problem. If we think that young people are a force of creativity and a force of nature, then that is where we're going to win. So one of the things when we are thinking about how those synapses start joining with the pruning, when we think about that, just imagine, and I always use this as an example, if you go to the gym and you start using weights, if you use weights on your arms like this, but you don't do your legs, you'll end up looking like a frog, won't you? You'll have strong top, very tiny body. But the same thing happens with the brain. If there are parts of the brain you don't use, and the parts of the brain that you use, now that can be for negative and positive things. So what do we want to do? We want to make sure that the brain grows with positive things rather than negative things. Well, I went back on that one, but it's a summary. So, key ideas. The teenage brain is still developing. Nothing wrong with it. It's still developing, and we need to see it as that. Now, why is that important? Because in the way that it is developing towards something, we have a big role there. We have a big, we have an important task. We can be part of that development in a positive way. Sometimes when we think about how the brain develops, we also have to think about, are they having difficulties? Because one thing that can be scary is that we think, yes, all young people are like that. But not all young people are like that. Sometimes they may have a problem, and we will need to deal with that separately. And as I say, one of the most important things, I mean, I've also been reading lots of things about how, I'm assuming you're all teachers, how you are the people that are molding our young people for 20 years' time. You are those people that have the most important role. Forget parents by that time, because parents will have done the task. And I always say to parents that their important role is in getting the children, the young children, ready for schooling. Because what happens, same way with the teenagers, what happens between 0 and 3 has nothing to do with us teachers, has all to do with parents. If they don't get that part right, as teachers, we will struggle. Our role as teachers is then to have very well focused young children and for us to continue that development. And I think that is what is key. So we see it there again, it's rattling. We see it there again, an example of how when you're a little baby, and you can't stop. No, when you're a little baby, you're grabbing this, grabbing that, looking at that, doing this. A little baby, you start exploring, and it's in the adolescence, those emotional, intense moments where it is crucial that we are supported. It's as if we are a network of emotions without any restriction. We take risks, and not because we get up in the morning and we think, okay, what risk will I take today? It's because they think, oh, I'm going to do this, and they're not thinking this could happen. And sometimes they need to establish who they are, how they are, who they are as a person. And that is key. And the advantage of that rapid growth between 12 and 15, I don't know whether you've noticed how quickly they can learn and how quickly they can unlearn bad habits. Yeah? If we do it right. It really is important if we do it right at that stage. After that, everything will have been much more established. So again, if I were to ask you now, what changes can you make in your classroom? What changes can you make in your delivery, in the way that you are with young people? What changes can you make to make a difference? Then you're not going to be able to do everything at a time, and maybe you're doing them already. Maybe you're here because it's an area of interest for you. Maybe you're here because this is something very new to you. Maybe you want to work with adolescents. Maybe you work with adolescents now and don't quite understand them. It's up to you. What can you do when you have them there? And I think it's important that when we understand how we need to give them that secure emotional space for them to be, without judgment. Of course, we're going to tell them, what you did wasn't quite right. I'm not going to judge that. What are your thoughts on that? How do you feel about that? How can we get them to work together and we can withdraw? And that dialogue, the dialogue of respect. So even if I've worked with many young people and I've sat there and I've thought they are totally wrong in what they are thinking, but I don't tell them that. I let them work it out. And sometimes they've worked it out and they've come back to me and they've said something like, you know, I was thinking, I'm going to do that differently. But I haven't told them they had to do it differently. They've come into it with the support. Because the minute that you tell them, if they see you as a controlling person, they will rebel. So it really is important we understand that part. Any questions? I think someone will come in a minute, and I'm hoping I'll understand what you say. The gentleman is coming there with a microphone. I can just about hear it. Yeah, it's a little bit low.
Authority. For a long time, the authority or the relationship between the teacher and the student was about the authority of knowledge. Now, the world is changing, as you've said. We don't own the knowledge no more because of the AI and the internet and all that. So, what kind of relationship can we get between the adult and the teenager?
That is a very good question. Thank you for that. It is important because we no longer have all that knowledge. All they have to do, they have a question, all they have to do is this, they just go in here and they're going to get immediately the answer to something in a way they understand. And especially now with AI, it's scary. So what authority do we have? Well, we've lived, we've been students, we've been young people. We are probably part of a system. We may have had similar problems. And the biggest thing that we can give them, and this I think is key, because one of the things that young people struggle with is seeing the future very far ahead, which is why some, you know, when you're saying to them, you've got to study because you have to get a good job and in the future, they don't see any of that most of the time. One important thing that we need to give our young people is hope. That is the biggest authority, the biggest knowledge that we can have, that we have hope. Now, the world is a little bit scary at the moment with all the horrible things that are happening, but we can still be holders of hope. And I think that is the biggest gift we can give children, because of course we will also bring knowledge, because we will give them knowledge that the internet cannot give them. We will be able to sit down with them and we will be able to show them what it is to be valued, respected, and someone that wants to listen to you. The internet cannot give you that, although they are trying. AI is trying for you to have therapy online, which is scary. What can we give them? Hope, that patience, the wonder of life, our experience, and something that says, you are worth me being here with you now.
Okay, I will try to ask my question in English. I will try to ask my question in English. I haven't spoken it for a long, long time. I think for 30 years. Okay. I will try to ask my question in English. I haven't spoken it for a long, long time. I think for 13 years ago. My question is about social and emotional learning. I think that our teenagers nowadays needs to be heard, respected, yes, but we need to give them some skills-based learning about social and emotional learning overall with their issues of impulsivity and need of autonomy. What do you think about it, Mr. Mark? Thank you.
Yes, and again, they cannot get that from the internet. They cannot get that from AI, that sense of being sort of working together. Now, that emotional intelligence is something that we've got to be thinking about much more, because it is crucial. Now, how do we do that? Again, if we have a classroom where people are expected to work together, people are expected to collaborate, people are expected to learn, in different ways. One of the things really exciting, one of the things that is really, really helpful for that is being inclusive. That is quite an important aspect of it, because one of the things that we need to be very conscious of is that idea of having compassion for others. That, I think, is really key. But we have an important role to model that, because if we as grown-ups in the classroom cannot show compassion for our students, for our young people, then the young people are not going to be able to do that. And I think it's important. There are many, many strategies now that have to do with social learning and emotional learning. Why is that the case? Because we are seeing that it is harder and harder and harder for younger people to access that part of it, because they have been surrounded by so much technology, so much stimulation, so many expectations, that some of the things that as children we enjoyed, that doesn't happen. Again, I think one of the wonders about me visiting Morocco so often, I'm here probably every 3 or 4 weeks, and I've been doing that for the last 40 years. When I arrive, I land the ship, I get out of the ship, and immediately people are going to say, bonjour, hello. That doesn't happen in other countries. It doesn't happen. You mustn't lose that. You mustn't lose that sense of being able to engage. People in other countries now are frightened of talking to strangers. They are frightened of doing that. They're frightened of reaching out. And I think that we are losing out. We taught our young people to stay at home, not to talk to strange people, not to say hello to other people they didn't know, not to engage in like big groups. And I'm not seeing that in Morocco yet. I'm seeing the contrary, that when someone comes from outside, you welcome them. When someone comes from outside, there's that sense of belonging. And belonging in this sense is key. Why is belonging so important? Because you only know you belong when you feel safe and you feel secure. And that is the emotional intelligence and the social skills you need.
Okay. Okay, peace be upon you. Hello. We appreciate that you've been here and welcome. I just want you to ask a question about the teenagers, especially the students. So, can we be strict with the student teenager when they been rebelling in the classroom, so they understanding what they do or what they done, or we should be flexible, just flexible, or always flexible with them. Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
And again, a very difficult question when we're thinking about how many children, how many young people we have in the classroom. I don't like to use, I understand where the word strict comes from. In my line of work, I like to use the word boundaries. Because I think boundaries are key. No? So there are certain things you can do in my class. If you do this, you have to go somewhere else. And that is very different, because I'm giving them a choice. I am respecting that they have autonomy. Now, that can sometimes be difficult. I don't know whether you have a system in Morocco, whether you have a system of a timeout room, a room where someone who is struggling or is misbehaving can actually go to. And sometimes you send them, or sometimes they say, I want to go there. So it's very challenging, because what do? You want to create an environment where people are learning and someone is being a clown. And you want to make sure that doesn't happen. If we're talking about how we might work as a group, you might be wanting to engage some of those students in making those decisions with you. Again, it's not an easy thing to do, because you've got to have that state of mind where you might be giving some of your power over to the class, where you work as a team. But the idea is that if the behavior is intolerable, no, you don't have to have that person in your class, and that is clear. if the behavior is intolerable. But if the person is actually challenging some of those boundaries, well, work with those boundaries, see where you get them, because sometimes if you have the patience and you give them the time, they'll sit with your boundaries. And they will be learning for them, and they will be learning for the teacher, for you.
السلام عليكم. s'il vous plaît monsieur ممكن التحدث باللغة العربية؟ You speak Arabic or not? شي واحد فيكم يترجم ليه français. Comment, s'il vous plaît monsieur, comment puis-je faire pour sauver l'adolescent de lui-même, de ses émotions et aussi de leur comportement sans toucher sa personnalité.
Yes, so that is one of the biggest questions, no? How can you do it in a way that is sensitive to them? You can do it by actually saying to them, look, it is normal. It is normal for you to be struggling. It is normal for you to be having difficulty. It is normal for you to be having challenges. And I am here to help you, if I can help you, rather than be sort of very punishing or to be telling them, you've got to change. What I try to do is to say to them, I want to understand you. And I think that that sometimes helps, because if you want to understand someone, you are coming from a space of respect. If you tell someone, I want you to stop that, you're not respecting how they might be feeling. So it's that sense of not thinking about saving them from themselves, but helping them to see that what's going on for them is normal, might have an impact on others, and you're going to be there to help them. So what you're saying is that you are trying to explain something to them and they're not listening to you. They're not responding in a way that is helpful.
Oui. Alors quand je lui demande de faire quelque chose, il se tait, il ne me dit rien. Et puis il fait ce qu'il veut. Et même si je lui parle de son avenir, des problèmes qu'il peut rencontrer dans le futur, il ne s'intéresse pas. Je ne sais pas comment je vais motiver ce genre d'enfant, bien d'adolescent. C'est un ado de 15 ans. La deuxième question, c'est j'ai des élèves en classe qui ont des problèmes en famille et qui ont un très mauvais niveau, par exemple, en français. Ça veut dire, moi, je fais la leçon, ils ne comprennent presque rien. Comment je vais motiver ce genre d'élèves en classe? Et merci.
That's a very complicated question, because obviously the family is really key here. And if the family is not engaged, then that is a problem. You're going to have to need to bring in other... I don't know what support services you would have in Morocco, in the system, but you're going to have to bring other types of people, to work with you. Because if the person is not engaged, if they don't have the capacity, on top of having all the challenges that being a teenager brings, that's like hard work. In terms of not understanding what the future holds, yes, that's going to happen. And unfortunately, one of the things I learned when I was very young in my teaching is that you cannot do right for everybody. That is one of the things that I learned. You try your best, you do what you can, and you don't punish yourself for getting it wrong. When you're not getting through, you don't think of it in terms of, I have failed, or the young person is not in the right place. You think about it in terms of, how else might I be able to help? What other structures or systems are in place? And what sorts of things might we be able to look for to engage the person? So maybe school is not the place for the young person. Not everybody is okay with the schooling system. Maybe they need to be doing something much more practical. And I think in Morocco there are many trades. So, maybe there are students who are more suited for that. So the answer to that would probably be a whole week's workshop with other colleagues and other teachers for you to be able to understand some strategies and some ways of working. But here it would be difficult. But patience. when it's your child, yeah, when it's your child, it's even much more complicated because as I said before, not going to listen to the parents. Yeah, they're not going to listen to the parents. I had the same thing with mine. 15, 16, 17. And then 18. Ah, papa, bonjour. 18. 15, 16, 17.
Un grand merci à monsieur le conférencier pour ces informations scientifiques et pédagogiques de grande valeur qui auront sans aucun doute un impact positif sur le processus d'enseignement-apprentissage. Il ressort de votre intervention que l'enseignant dispose d'une opportunité d'influencer la disposition de l'adolescent afin d'accélérer ses apprentissages. Dans le cadre d'une pédagogie de travail en équipe organisée, en binôme, fondée sur des dynamiques émotionnelles issues des différences de genre. Toutefois, la question qui nous vient à l'esprit est de savoir dans quelle mesure cette approche est compatible avec les spécificités culturelles locales, c'est-à-dire marocaines, empreinte de pudeur et comment l'enseignant peut veiller à transformer la timidité en une assurance positive dans le respect de la pudeur et des bonnes mœurs reconnues dans la société marocaine. Merci.
Okay, so I'm going to try. I think I've understood the question more or less. I only speak French when I come to Morocco, so it's one of those things. It is a challenge to balance what the expectation of the school is, what the expectation of parenting is, and what the understanding of the difficulties we experience when we are young. No? We know that to balance the two things is key. And the answer is in that balancing. The answer is not in going to an extreme where you become controlling or going to the other extreme where you let everything pass. There has to be boundaries. We have to have boundaries in place, and that is what is key. So, for example, when someone is really withdrawn and you want to bring them out a little bit, you're not going to be thinking big task, you're going to be thinking small steps. And if in those small steps, we have to be thinking about engaging with others, anything to do with respect, anything to do with how they feel, how they see themselves, then we have to have those things in place. We cannot just think, okay, I'm going to encourage them. Because if they don't feel safe with other things in place, then that's not going to happen. But the big challenge is to balance. We are never going to get it 100% right. In fact, we are going to be very good teachers if 50% of the time we get it right. We are going to be very, very good teachers if we do that, because it shows that we have the capacity. If 50% of your interventions work, it shows that you care and that you can do it. The other 50 that don't work, there are other more complicated things in place often. And you've mentioned some, the family, all sorts of other things that go, society, the level of intelligence the young person may have, all those things are crucial. So if I want you to leave with one thing today, it's that understanding that being an adolescent in any country is a wonderful thing. Because it's a moment of growth, it's a moment of learning, it's a moment of becoming who you will be. And the other thing is that unless you see it in that way and you manage to harness all the patience you can master, you're not going to do very well working with young people. So there has to be that sort of level of patience. There has to be that. Many young people will be fine. They will do as they are told. They will go through the process in a good way. But there are going to be many also that are going to be challenging. Anyway, I'm aware that everybody's sort of disappearing. It's been lovely to have this lovely, engaging audience with such wonderful level of English. It's a shame on me that after 40 years, I still cannot speak Arabic other than Aji, Yalla, Safi, Shukran.
Really, I do not have a question, but I would like to thank you for this good information. Moreover, to achieve a better future, we are demanded to look for good information like that and to organize forum of education and school. So thank you, and next time, if there is next time. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Ismail. So first of all, just about the question of the teacher, our friends. She tried to say that they didn't aggravate, or she didn't aggravate the problem with in this relation with adolescents. But basically, she tried to be good, to be a good role models with adolescents. That's first. My question is how can we be a good role models in our society, and with this challenge, societal challenge with internet in streets, or this problem. So, thank you very much.
Okay, so this idea of being a role model, you might be thinking that you're a role model for a young person, but it's the young person who decides if you're a role model, not the other way around. And that is what is interesting here. The young person needs to see in you values that are important to them. If they don't, it doesn't matter how softly spoken you are, how gentle you are, it doesn't matter. You're not going to reach out to them. No? So sometimes when we know that that isn't happening, it's backing off. It's saying, okay, it's backing off because you tried your best, no? So the idea of a role model for the student doing everything right might not be everything right for the student. It's everything right for you. So that's important. What do we need to do in society? I think, look, we need more things like this where we listen to each other, where we say, good things about each other. It's important to say good things about each other. It's important to value when someone gets something right, to say, that was good. But, we are very quick to say to people, you got that wrong. But when they get it right, we never say that. I made sure that I've said that today because, to many people, because I was asked to come about 3 weeks ago. And I thought, oh my God, 3 weeks? I don't think I can do it. And then I thought, yes, Morocco, I can do it because I love being in Morocco, so I'm going to do it. And their organization, the people who have organized this, have been spectacular. I have made sure that every person that I have dealt with, I have said to them, I really have to thank you for such a spectacular organization. And what does that do? They feel valued. When they feel valued, they want to help you out. So I've had offers to take me to see places, to do all sorts of wonderful things. So what's the best thing you can do to be a good role model? Grateful, be present, and be prepared to listen to others. Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll finish.